On today's episode of Locked On Wild, what would a Minnesota roster look like for the Four Nations face-off?
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, we are your team each and every day. And we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we, off of the Four Nations face-off, will make a Minnesota players roster. We'll see who we get amongst players that were born in Minnesota, and you'll be interested to see how the roster unfolds. We'll talk about some of the tough decisions on the roster as well. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild, and we welcome you into today's episode. Unfortunately, Team USA could not get it done in the Four Nations face-off, but how about this? The Four Nations championship between U.S. and Canada, 9.3 million viewers, which is higher than any NHL game ever. That is outstanding production for the Four Nations face-off, and just shows you that if you can find a way to do something different than the All-Star game, people are going to tune in, people are going to watch. I thought it would be fun today to just try to kind of put a Minnesota spin on the entire Four Nations face-off, because obviously you're picking players from the particular country that they are representing. And let's just say the NHL does a 50 states showdown. I mean, you're probably not going to have a team from every state, but Minnesota, a hotbed for hockey players. They have sent plenty of players to the NHL level. And so why don't we just put a roster together and we'll see what we end up with. Now, we're going to start with the goalies first, because there's really no debate here as to the direction that this thing is going. Your starter for Team Minnesota is going to be Jake Oettinger, who is, one of the better young goalies in the league, a strong in-net presence for the Dallas Stars. But there really isn't another goalie that would give, a ton of challenges, a bona fide starter. I mean, the other two names that will make the roster for the goalies, Charlie Lindgren and Alex Lyon. So those two, they're solid. They're solid goalies. So it's not like your only option is Jake Oettinger, but again, among the three, he is no question the starter of the group. I mean, he has this year a 2.35 goals against average. He's 26-12, and he has a point. He's got an assist on the season. So we like goalies that can get involved in the play here from time to time. So it's a pretty easy choice for me. The Team Minnesota goalie would be Jake Oettinger in net, and you feel pretty good, I think, about that compared to what the rest of the NHL would be able to put together for their respective states. Jake Oettinger is certainly amongst the mix, and certainly is going to be somebody that is hard to top by other states. So I feel good about the goalie situation, and if you look even. Oettinger is second in the league in wins. He is, in terms of save percentage, he's got to be near the top of the list as well. Obviously, Connor Hellebuck at the top of the list. Oettinger amongst full-time starters, he's in the top 15, but you've got a ton of names on this list of guys that have played, sparingly. So He's number 2 in wins. As far as goals against average goes, he's in the top 10 there as well. Just a solid season, a very solid season for Oettinger in net. And he would, I think, put Team Minnesota, because as we'll talk about with the with the offense, not necessarily the defense, but with the offense, you're probably going to need to get some good goalie play here in order to win this 50 States Showdown, as I'm calling it. But Oettinger could certainly give you what Connor Hellebuck gave Team USA. And we saw in the championship game, in order for Canada to win, Jordan Binnington needed to outduel Connor Hellebuck, and he did. He needed to outduel Connor Hellebuck in order for Team Canada to come away with the championship win. And he was able to, especially in OT, especially down the stretch in the third period in an OT. He was just absolutely lights out. And Jordan Binnington or Jake Oettinger has that sort of play in his pocket as well. So I feel pretty good about him starting for Team Minnesota. The rest of the roster is interesting. The top end of the offense is pretty darn good. The defense as a whole I like, but you're in real good hands with Jake Oettinger as your netminder for a Team Minnesota. So we're going to go through the rest of the roster here. We'll go to the forwards next. We'll talk about the defensemen as well, and we'll take a look at some of the notable snubs from Team Minnesota as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there is no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. My favorite part about FanDuel is that whatever you are feeling, FanDuel has a bet for it. Whether you want to start to look ahead for futures on the Minnesota Twins, if you want to put down on them to win the Central Division, to make the playoffs, to win a round or two, you can go all the way down to the end of the season. Or if you want to just go game by game, FanDuel offers that capability as well. And right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Just a programming note here. We are full into the section playoffs here and starting with section hockey. So we will not have a postcast for you tomorrow for the game against Detroit, because I have 2 hockey games at 11 o'clock and 1. So I probably won't be getting back into town until 4 or 5 o'clock. And by that point, the game will be long over. But we will talk about it Sunday at noon, as that'll be our next live show with Denny. So make sure to tune in noon on Sunday. And we will recap the game. We'll talk some Four Nations. Should be a great show at noon on YouTube. As we continue to take a look at the all Minnesota roster for what I'm calling is the 50 States Showdown, let's talk about the forwards a little bit, because there certainly is a ton of top-end talent for the Minnesota forward group. And so I will just read off, what I put into the lineup, and we'll go through the bench players as well, and then look at some of the other names that that make the list. So starting on offense, then I just kind of cobbled the lines together. You've got Anders Lee, Brock Nelson, and Jake Guentzel. Now, point of clarification on Jake Guentzel, because he was technically born in Omaha, Nebraska. So he's not technically one of us, but let's be honest. He went to Woodbury. He is, he is synonymous with Minnesota hockey. So he counts. He counts as part of this. And so Jake Guentzel is one of your top line forwards. Second line, I went Brock Besser, Casey Middlestat, and Noah Cates. Third line, Bobby Brink, Tommy Novak, and Ryan Poehling. And then Cole Koepke, Nick Bjugstad, and Johnny Brodzinski as your fourth line. For the extra forwards, because I went 30 player roster essentially, to allow for some flexibility. So an extra forward line, an extra pair of defensemen, and an extra goalie, just so that the Minnesota team doesn't run into the same problems that Team USA did with players getting injured and then having the NHL be like, I don't know what to tell you. So it's pretty clear that Lee, Nelson, Guentzel, and Besser are top six guys. And that's not too shabby of a combination. And I tried to kind of match it up by handedness. So you could theoretically put Brock Besser on the top line. Brock Nelson is pretty clearly the top center on this team. So he's going on that top line regardless. Casey Middlestat is he's not having a great year this year, but he's a pretty solid number two center. And then you've got Tommy Novak and then Nick Bjugstad, who is still just continuing to kick in a bottom six role at the NHL level, and he would be a great fit for Team Minnesota in that bottom six. And for the reserves, I went Cole Smith, Vinny Lettieri, and Joey Anderson. They've got at least a little production amongst the groups of them, but not too many on the offensive side. There aren't too many snubs from this grouping. The players that did not make the roster, Brian Halonen, Travis Boyd, Riley Tuft, Dominic Tonatino, Ben Myers. Those guys are lower part of the lineup players. So it really just comes down to kind of what you're trying to do with the last little bit. Vinny Lettieri at least brings a little speed. So I like that. And, I got to say, I kind of dig, because Tommy Novak is great. He's a great, very skilled. He had the Wild's number a couple of seasons ago, where it seemed like he scored every time the Wild played the Predators, which makes you be like, boy, will be nice to have a guy like that on this Minnesota Wild team. We can get him on Team Minnesota at least, and then that bottom six has a little bite to him. I kind of dig that bottom six portion, and it's an older top six for the most part. Although Noah Cates, who is he's in on the younger side, 25, slots in on the second line. Casey Middlestat's 26, so some of that does balance out. And then of course Brock Besser's still on the right side of 30, but Lee, Nelson, and Guentzel is pretty solid as a top line for you. Then of course Besser, Middlestat, and Cates isn't bad either, but I think that third line is kind of the one that I dig, with Bobby Brink, Tommy Novak, and Ryan Poehling, to kind of put things together. So it's pretty dependent on the top two lines to score, just like the Minnesota Wild at this point. Pretty dependent on those top couple lines to do the scoring. As far as the defense goes, this was really fun because there are some great young defensemen at the NHL level that are from Minnesota that I think provide some interesting options. So here's what I did for the defense. I went Jackson LaCombe and Brock Faber as your top pairing. Jackson LaCombe playing for the Anaheim Ducks right now. He is leading Minnesota defensemen in points, but his defensive numbers are great. He has over 7 point shares on defense so far this season. So I feel like he's a solid pairing with Brock Faber. And can we gush about Brock Faber a little bit here? Just astounded by his performance in the Four Nations face-off. Him and Jacob Slavin just shutting down Team Canada in the championship game. And you have the comments from Mike Sullivan after the game saying he's wise beyond his years. He's a player that just the game is never too big for him. He's able to slow things down, and he plays very calmly out there. But not only just playing calm out there, but actually making an impact on defense. That was a huge reason as to why Team USA was able to hold until the game-winning goal, Connor McDavid in check, is because they utilized that Faber-Slavin pairing to really try to shut those guys down up until, for some reason, the game-winning goal. They weren't on the ice for that. So I don't know. I don't know why that happened. Sometimes things like that happen in games, but it was great to see not only Brock Faber, but most of the Minnesota Wild contingent have solid performances throughout the tournament. And especially with Joel Eriksson Ek, Elias Pettersson was expected to be like the bona fide number 1 center for Sweden. And with his performance, a goose egg, no points, and just getting demoted all the way down to the 4th line at one point, Joel Eriksson Ek took that spot from Elias Pettersson, whose season continues to be just miserable. So anyway, back to the defense. Jackson LaCombe and Brock Faber is the top pairing that I put together. Now I went a little more vet laden for pairing number 2. I went Brady Shea and Ryan McDonough for the second pairing. Obviously, they're a little on the older side. McDonough 35, Shea is 30. The numbers are not great for Shea, but McDonough somehow is a plus 31 on the season. So he is not responsible for hardly any goals. And then the third pairing, I went Nick Jensen. He's got great defensive metrics. Mikey Anderson from the Los Angeles Kings. He's a player I know that has been discussed in the comments about a guy who maybe the Wild should take a peek at. One of us. But he is a block and a hit magnet for the Los Angeles Kings. He's not afraid to throw his body down. He's not afraid to throw his body weight around. He just picks up blocks and hits like they're trading cards. So I had to get him in as a third pairing to put that decor together. And I think that decor is really solid. Now you can mix and match, and you maybe don't put McDonough and Shea as your second pairing. You put them maybe as your third. But Jackson LaCombe and Brock Faber as your top D pairing. That's pretty nice. I dig that a lot. And as far as the reserves go, hear me out on this. I went Keandre Miller. Now, he had a huge year last season. This year, he's not doing as much. And then I went Nate Schmidt. Nate Schmidt as kind of a veteran, like a morale booster type guy. He would be a third pairing defenseman if he got into the lineup, and probably the same thing for Keandre Miller, but he does bring some good speed to the table. Some of the other names that did not make the cut. Ryan Lindgren is probably the most notable, but Justin Falk as well. Now, these are ranked by points, and I see some of the minus numbers on these guys, and that's what led me to shy away from them. Justin Falk was a notable snub. Ryan Lindgren, a notable snub. Nick Perbix, Dylan Sandberg, Nick Seeler, Scott Perunovich, Will Borgen. Those are the most, I think, notable names. Of course, Nick Leddy, he's all the way down at the bottom of the list, but that's because he got hurt. And so he hasn't played hardly at all. But another interesting one who is just kind of getting his career started was Wyatt Kaiser, draft pick of the Chicago Blackhawks. He's played in 35 games, not a ton of points, but from what I have heard from Blackhawks fans, they're pretty impressed with what they've seen from him so far. So he's another notable snub. But I don't know. I look at this roster. I think the top two lines can give you some scoring. But just like the actual Minnesota Wild, this is a roster that is certainly going to lean on their defense and goaltending in order to win games. And just looking at, like, I would be interested to see what some of the other lineups look like. Let's take Colorado, for instance. Well, they only have 6 players that are currently on NHL rosters. How about, let's try Massachusetts. They got to have a ton. The Massachusetts team, yikes. The Massachusetts team would probably win this thing, at least from a skill standpoint. Now, their goalie situation isn't too bad. But let's just look at some of the other states to finish off the show today that might be able to give Minnesota a run for their money. I don't want to speak too soon, but we'll look at what Boston's working with here. Holy cow. We'll discuss all that as we finish today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by SelectQuote. In sports, having a winning strategy is everything. It's how the best teams make it to the Super Bowl, the World Series, and the Olympics. The same goes for life. Having a strategy like life insurance from SelectQuote can protect your financial legacy and keep your family's future secure. SelectQuote makes it easy to find the perfect life insurance policy. As one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, they've helped over 2 million customers find $700 billion in coverage since 1985. What sets SelectQuote apart is their personal touch. Unlike other brokers that offer one-size-fits-all policies, their licensed agents tailor coverage to fit your unique needs. If you're in good health, you might even qualify for same-day coverage of up to $5 million. No medical exam required. And it's more affordable than you think. You can get up to $1 million in coverage for as little as $20 a month. Get the right offer, the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/lockedonnhl. Go to selectquote.com/lockedonnhl today to get started. That's selectquote.com/lockedonnhl. SelectQuote. They shop, you save. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. We are your team each and every day. And once again, a reminder, no postcast for you tomorrow, as I will be in the throes of section hockey playoffs. So we'll just recap the game on Sunday for Denny's next live show, which will be at noon on YouTube. So we'll talk about the game. We'll talk about the Four Nations face-off and plenty of other items to get to as well. Which other states can give the Minnesota Wild a run for their money as far as the 50 States Showdown? Well, Boston is number one, because listen to these names that would make it onto the, let's just look at the forward group for this Boston roster. You got Jack Eichel, Matt Boldy, Ryan Donato, Connor Garland, Matty Beniers, Frank Vetrano, Will Smith, Adam Gaudette, Chris Kreider, Charlie Coyle. Those are all players on the roster that have at least 10 goals, other than Will Smith, who has 8. But that's pretty deep. That is a pretty deep forward group. And on defense, John Carlson, Matt Grzelcyk, Noah Hannafin, Henry Thrun, John Marino, Jordan Harris, Ryan Shea, Michael Callahan. That's your 8 defensemen. You've got pretty solid. You got a pretty solid top four, but beyond that, it gets tricky. I would give the edge to Team Minnesota as far as the defense goes. And goaltending, you got Joey Decord and Drew Comezzo. Comezzo has only played in 2 games, but Decord is a pretty solid starter for them. So I would say I would still give the edge to Minnesota because they have the better defense. They got the better goaltending. A forward group, Boston's got plenty. So that would definitely lean in Boston's favor, but I still would lean Team Minnesota overall. What about the wonderful state of Florida? How does Florida's team look here? Oh yeah, they don't have enough to field a full team. What about and I'm doing this fully organically just to try to see how things look. New York, the great state of New York, is another team that I think would give the Minnesota contingent a little bit of a run for their money. Here's what the forward grouping looks like for Team New York: Alex Tuck, Kyle Palmieri, Patrick Kane, Matt Coronado, Nick Foligno, Shane Pinto, Marcus Foligno, Joel Farabee, Alex Iafallo, Trevor Zegras, Zach Aston Reese, Kevin LeBlanc. Those are your top 12, at least in terms of points. But you've also got Jordan Greenway. You got Miles Wood. Minnesota gets the edge on offense for sure. Now, there may be a little more depth to the Team New York offense, but I think Minnesota has the higher end forwards, to say the least. On defense, Adam Fox, Thomas Harley, Charlie McAvoy, Zach Bogosian, Brett Pesce, Nick DeSimone, Dennis Gilbert, and Steve Santini are your 8 defensemen. And I thought that was so funny. Michael Russo talking with Dan Barrero on KFAN while I was running errands this afternoon, talking about how Adam Fox just had a disastrous performance in the Four Nations face-off. So he'd be part of your top pairing, although you'd probably go Harley McAvoy as your top D pairing, and then you could go Bogosian and Fox. That D-core, again, I'm giving Minnesota the edge there because I think the 3 pairings are just better for what Team Minnesota has. Only one problem, though, with the New York team: no goalies. So Minnesota gets the edge over Team New York, at least in this little mini tournament that we are putting together. As you look at some of the other states throughout the great United States, New Jersey would maybe be the other one. Let's just see what the New Jersey roster looks like. They're able to at least, well, they've got 12, so they can't field a full roster. Oh boy, Arizona can't field a full team, but listen to this for the top ends of their forward group: Matthew Tkachuk, Tage Thompson, Brady Tkachuk, Matthew Nyes. That is, wow. That's a lot of good stuff. They just don't have enough to field a full team, so we can't include them. You know who we can, though? Michigan. This is the final team that we'll look at and see if they have enough to contend with Team Minnesota. So here's what Team Michigan has for their forward grouping: Kyle Connor, Dylan Larkin, Alex DeBrincat, Brian Rust, Josh Norris, Andrew Kopp, Paul Cotter, Mitchell Chafee, Nick Robertson, Frankie Nazar, Michael McCarron, and Luke Glendening are your top 12 from Michigan. They've got some real good top ends, like Kyle Connor, prolific goal scorer. Dylan Larkin had a fantastic Four Nations run. Alex DeBrincat, also very solid. Brian Rust, Josh Norris, huge piece for the Senators. So I would say I would probably tend to lean Michigan here, at least on the offensive side. Now, what does the defense look like? They've got Zach Werenski, Matt Roy, Jalen Chatfield, Ian Cole, Jacob Trouba, Alec Martinez, Nick Blankenberg, and Jeff Petrie. Yeah, Minnesota by far. I mean, Werenski is great. Werenski is one of the young emerging defensemen in the league. He's fantastic. The rest of the grouping is not great. And, oh boy, Team Michigan gets Connor Hellebuyck as their starter and Caden Primo as their backup. So one of the few goalies that can one-up you in this tournament, Connor Hellebuyck. I was really hoping that that he was going to be on one of the teams that didn't have enough to field the roster. So let's look at the teams that we have that have full teams to be able to throw at this thing. So you've got Minnesota, you've got Boston, you've got New York. Other than a goalie, we'll throw New York in because I do want listener feedback on this. So of the teams that we looked at, Minnesota, Michigan, New York, and Boston, who do you think has the best roster? Let me know in the comments. And maybe this is something that I will try to put together in the off season, like revisit it and actually simulate out how this type of a tournament would run. Let me know if you think that's a cool idea too. But that'll do it for today's episode. Again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. And thank you for making us part of your daily routine. Make sure to subscribe if you have not already so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We've got new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.